welcome to the next module. In this module, we are going to see persistent pollutants in the Arctic. So let us start with the Arctic environment. This Arctic environment is affected by climate change that we had been seeing so far. And in this module, we will be mainly focusing on the accumulation of toxic substances which affects the Arctic environment. And why we have to worry about the accumulation of toxic substances? Because this results in changes in biodiversity in the Arctic region. In fact, the accumulation of toxic substance in the Arctic environment leads to changes in biological diversity. So that's what we are going to study about, the accumulation of toxic substances, how do they affect the Arctic environment. This is called as a canary in coal mine. The Arctic is basically called as a canary in the coal mine. That means with respect to global warming, we are going to talk about what changes are going to happen in the entire world is actually seen beforehand in the Arctic region. So that is what the canary in the coal mine in the Arctic means. That means in the olden days, people used the canaries to find out the presence of carbon monoxide in the coal mines. So that is what, when there is carbon monoxide in the coal mine, the canaries will just die. So that is the reason. From that people can easily figure it out, okay, carbon monoxide is there, so we should not go. So this is an indicator beforehand that what is going to happen is being seen. Similarly, the global warming is going to affect the entire world. That means how do we know that Arctic is going to behave like a canary to tell to the entire world that what are the changes that is happening in the Arctic currently because of the global warming is going to affect the rest of the world. So how do we know that? We can actually see the food web. So the algae lives in the food web. The bottommost part is algae. Zooplanktons live or eat algae, and Arctic cod eats the zooplankton, and the seabirds eat the Arctic cod. Whales and seals eat the seabirds. The top predator, polar bear, is the whales and seals. So when there is a change in the Arctic environment, the entire food web is getting affected. So that is what we say. We can actually see what is the changes that is happening in the Arctic. And pollution. So we are mainly going to focus on pollutants affecting the Arctic. So the first reference to the pollution in the Arctic region was called as Arctic haze. Actually in 1883 it was actually seen. That means 2 centuries ago itself people had observed it. So Nordenskjöld, when he went for a expedition in the Arctic region, he wrote in his scientific article that from time to time this veil of cloud are called as haze. So this is the first reference to the term haze. Descended to the surface of the ice and hid the view over the expanse. But it was, remarkably enough, not wet, but dry. Yes, so dry that our wet clothes absolutely dried in it. So this is the first reference to the haze in the Arctic region. I witnessed a phenomenon on the inland ice of Greenland, which is related to the sun smoke phenomenon of Scandinavia, or broid sec, which is the French word for dry fog. So here you can see there is a haze. In other words, the sky is not clear. It is like a very cloudy or something similar to that. So this is first observed in 1883 in the Arctic region by the famous explorer. Okay, so this is the first reference to the Arctic pollution. And we are going to look at persistent organic pollutants. So what are persistent organic pollutants? According to the Stockholm Convention 2001, there are few definitions. So anything which falls under this category is called as persistent organic pollutant. So the first thing is the chemical needs to persist in the environment for extended period of time. It should have a potential to undergo long-range transport. It should accumulate in humans' flora or fauna, and it should cause adverse effect. If any compound that belongs to all the 4 categories, then it is labeled as a persistent organic pollutant. And the main thing is long range transport is the main thing. That means in the Arctic, if you are going to see, Arctic doesn't have any industry or other things. So that means everything has to come from outside of that region. So that is the reason long range transport is the main thing, which is also falling under the category of persistent organic pollutants. So these POPs are present in Arctic air, seawater, sediment, soil, plants and biota from terrestrial, freshwater and marine environment. So Arctic is filled with lots of these kind of pollutants. It is called as initial 12 POP, that is dirty dozen is the term which is given to these kind of compounds. So what are they? Basically these are pesticides, industrial chemicals and byproducts. So what are the pesticides? Aldrin, chloridane, DDT, dieldrin, endrin. So there are various compounds which are given, and the industrial chemicals include hexachlorobenzene and PCBs. And when we talk about the byproduct, these are hexachlorobenzene, polychlorinated dibenzo P dioxins and PCDD, PCDF and PCBs etc. are there. So all these 12 different types of compounds are called as the dirty dozen. So what is the characteristics of some compound to be called as a POP, that is persistent organic pollutant? So persistent means they are highly resistant to environmental degradation processes such as chemical, biological or photolytic degradation. This persistence allows them to remain in the environment for extended period of time. Persistent means it exists forever. Similar to that, not necessarily that it will exist forever, but it will exist for a longer time. So that is what is persistent. Bioaccumulation means it should accumulate from, that's the reason we have seen the food web. So it will start from the zooplankton and up to the polar bear, top of the predator. So it actually undergoes bioaccumulation. So from one species to the other species to the higher ups, it is actually going on. So this accumulated mainly in the fatty tissues of the living organism, these organic pollutants. And in the Arctic, they can build up in the food chain. That's what we have seen. So starting from small organisms and moving up to the top predator like polar bears and seals. So the bioaccumulation happens because of this pollutants. And then biomagnification is the next problem. So due to their persistence and bioaccumulation, because of the first 2 points, the POPs become more concentrated as they move up the food chain. That means zooplankton is a very small species, but just the higher one can eat, the fish can eat too much of the zooplankton. So that means there is lots of accumulation that is happening within the fish. And when the bird eats lots of fish, so again there is one more biomagnification happening. When the seal or other higher predators eat the bird, then there again the biomagnification happens. So that means from one level to the higher level, the magnification happens in multitudes. And long range transport we have seen because Arctic receives so many pollutants from the rest of the world. So the long distance travel there from their original source through atmospheric and ocean currents. So in the Arctic, this long range transport is a significant issue because the POPs does not originate within Arctic, but they reach Arctic from the industrial activities which are far from the polar regions, and they all have the environmental impact. So here is a mind map chart which talks about the bioavailability, uptake, bioaccumulation and fate of POPs in the Arctic system. In the textual content, we will be discussing elaborately about each factors. The first one is the environmental conditions. Here we can talk about temperature, precipitation, sea ice, that is extent of the sea ice change, thickness, age and length of the ice season. So all these things affect the bioaccumulation or the persistent organic pollutants presence. Glaciers, snow covers, permafrost, freshwater runoff, nutrient availability, all these are called as the environmental conditions. And POP's physical characteristics include hydrophobicity and reclariance. So these are all the two major properties. And when we talk about the biological factors, physiological variables and ecological variables are involved in that. So this is the way in which the pollutants affect the species. So this is the species are being affected because of the pollutants. And here we look at the physical changes in the environment. So because of the pollutant, what happens to the Arctic environment is given here. And biological and ecological changes are happening because of the accumulation of pollutants. And finally, we know about the climate change, which also affects the Arctic environment. So the more details about this mind map will be discussed in the e-learning content, that is the PDF file. So what are the problems because of this accumulation of pollutants? One is human health risk. Then we also know because of this pollutant, there is a climate change interaction. Say for example, when we talk about the human health risk, what happens is the indigenous community lives on the fish and other things which are available in the Arctic environment. So bioaccumulation of pollutant actually not only affects the fish and other things, even the humans which consume this meat also for their as a food, they are also getting affected. So for example, the health effect includes the potential impact on endocrine system, reproductive health and increased cancer risk. So these are all the problems faced by the indigenous communities because of the consumption of food from the Arctic food web. And when we talk about the climate change interactions, the climate change can be increased because of the associated pollutants. So as the temperature increases, previously frozen organic pollutants can be released from the ice and snow, increasing their availability in the environment. Additionally, the melting ice can also expose previously contaminated areas. So this is what is the main thing. Temperature change affects or releases more pollutants to the environment. And how do we control this? We can do regulation and monitoring. So that is the reason various conventions are being made with the collaboration from various countries, and then we try to reduce the pollutants spreading to the Arctic region. And what are the sources from which place the pollutants reach? The entire earth, we can say. The globe is the main place from where the pollutants are produced and they reach the Arctic region. And the long range atmospheric transfer is the primary mechanism for their arrival. So through air it travels. And the distribution in the Arctic system, how much they are distributed? The POP tend to be more concentrated in the Arctic ecosystem due to their ability to be transported long distance and their tendency to accumulate in colder regions. So this is one of the reasons. So they get concentrated or accumulated more because of the low temperatures. They can be found in air, water, soil or biota. And the next major concern is chemicals of emerging concern. So we have talked about the organic pollutants. Along with that organic pollutant, chemicals of emerging concern is also another important pollutant. So these are being newly introduced. That means they are replacing the old chemicals, or some of the chemicals are banned. For example, many chemicals are banned after the Stockholm Convention. So they are phased out, but new chemicals are actually getting introduced. So advances in analytical chemistry actually permit their identification and or quantification with a sufficient degree of reliability. That means these chemicals may become a problematic one in the future. So that's why these are called as chemicals of emerging concern. So we are only having the concern. We are not sure whether it is actually going to be a persistent pollutant in the future. So here is the comparison between what is called the conventional pollutant and the chemicals of emerging concern. So the definition is chemical not widely regulated or monitored but potentially harmful. So this is the important word. Potentially harmful is the only thing right now we know. So that's why we say it is a chemical of emerging concern. But when we talk about pollutant, these have established regulations and monitoring standards. In other words, we already know these chemicals are going to cause lots of problems. And the examples include pharmaceutical, personal care product, endocrine disruptors or chemicals of emerging concern. But pollutant means heavy metals like lead, mercury, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide are already declared chemical pollutants. And the sources are given and what is the regulations currently we have to control this and how do we detect it. Basically, if you look at the detection, the chemicals of emerging concern requires advanced analytical technique for detection because they are present in very small quantities. But for the conventional pollutant, we already know they are pollutants, so there are lots of methods already developed, analytical method developed for their detection. Persistent and public awareness are the things we had given here. And what is the major environmental impact? For the chemicals of emerging concern, they are potentially unknown or poorly understood environmental impact. So currently we are not very clear what they are going to cause in the future. But we know they may be creating some problems in the later part. Whereas conventional pollutant, we exactly know they are well documented. Environmental health and impacts are already known. And health risks are, both of them are going to cause damages to the humans and the ecosystem.